Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
Josh, how are you doing?
Oh, hey.
Hey!
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm so happy I was able to talk to you guys.
I'm just utterly stoked about it. Especially the topic you're calling in about, which, true story, is my favorite thing to talk about. If by true story you mean, well, you'll see. Go ahead, Josh. Josh, what's your topic and what's your question?
Total nitpick, but I've been mulling this over lately. So first of all, I'm an atheist. I don't know if you said that. I'm not a theist. So this is a complete and total nitpick, but on these live shows, I get, and there's a ton of them, right? Talk Heathen, there's the Atheist Experience, there's your show.
We've never heard of those.
I find that everybody keeps using a definition of atheism that is not wrong, but useless.
Okay, that I might not disagree with, but I also think the definition of atheism is basically next to useless, but I think that's a good thing, so we'll talk about why. But go ahead and further present what you perceive as the definition we are using.
Your opinion on...
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so one of the things I hear all the time, and I don't know if you or Paul have ever used this definition, so excuse me if you haven't, and I apologize, but
yeah.
I hear this definition all the time: lack of belief in a God.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a completely useless definition. Nearly everything lacks a belief in nearly everything.
So I'll give you a few of the qualifiers that even non-atheist philosophy-loving people like my friend Ocean would mention. When it comes to something that is a word that is an identifier, you have to be capable of identifying on a personal level to accept the label. So this is where the argument comes in. Are rocks atheists? And the answer is no, even if to these people, I don't care if rocks are atheists or not. I genuinely don't give a fuck at all. Like, I'm fine. I could proceed either way. But to people making this argument, the lack of atheism still requires you to be capable of identifying to use an identifying label. So rocks wouldn't be atheists because rocks are incapable of identifying themselves. Even babies wouldn't be.
Doesn't disbelief kind of work better than lack of belief in this case? Wouldn't you think?
I think the reason why most people aren't going to say disbelief is because disbelief, I don't think you're wrong that it could work. However, it's one of those things where now you have a set of definitions that could be different. Because I can say I have a disbelief and mean pretty much lack of belief, but I could also say my disbelief means I am saying I believe there are no gods. Which, as a personal belief, I probably actually do lean toward, but a lot of people want to rather go with, I do not say there are no gods, I don't say there are gods. I like this sort of default position prior to any evidence or case made for either side, or even after the case is made for either side. I am still saying, is there a God or isn't there a God? I'm giving no verdict.
Well, apart from my personal opinion that nobody actually holds that fictional default belief, which I probably shouldn't debate with you and Paul here now, but my opinion is that most atheists, if not all atheists, actually do believe the opposite, that there is probably no God.
Probably no God, though.
My experience at all.
But, I don't know if it is or isn't, because you said believes there probably is no God, and that word probably adds an awful lot of context to it. If you were to say most atheists believe that there are no God, then there is no God, then I would actually say that's not my experience at all. But when you say probably, I don't think we're in disagreement, and I think that it's one of those things where, with a lot of things, if you can't demonstrate something exists and you are the inventor of that thing, then people are going to default that it probably doesn't. So if you say there's a magic fairy in my backyard that feeds me chocolate soup, and you don't present the chocolate soup fairy, which is now all I'm going to be thinking about for the rest of the night, the person you're presenting it to is probably going to default to, I can't say it doesn't exist, but it probably doesn't. But that's still, I think, different than saying I have an all-out disbelief. I think the lack of belief allows for some nuance. And then when you talk about, I'm glad it wasn't the conversation I thought you were calling in to have, Josh. I'll tell you what that is in a moment. But with that lack of belief, we now put other qualifiers on top of it. So we say someone is a weak atheist if they really just hold purely to that standard, or someone is a strong atheist if their belief is there is no gods. But then we also have other qualifiers on top of that, some related to political issues, so like active atheist versus inactive atheist, explicit versus implicit, closeted atheist, all these other terms that are good qualifiers. And the reason why I prefer the way things are now is because the qualifiers allow your label to be more descriptive, and I think empowering descriptive labels is always a positive. The argument I thought you were calling in was to have an argument about modern day colloquial use of atheism versus traditional philosophical use of the word atheism. And I probably would have at some point poked my own eyes out. Real quick, before we go back to Josh, I want to see if Paul has any thoughts.
Yeah, Josh, I'd actually like to ask you. So you're claiming that this definition, lack of a belief, is useless. So I want to ask you just a couple of questions. So would you agree that the label married is a useful label?
Yeah, in context, yeah.
Okay. Would you then also agree that not married is a useful label?
No, because everything could potentially not be not married. Nearly everything except for the one thing you're talking about. It could describe everything but that one thing.
Let's say we're talking about you literally don't think not married when we're talking about people is useful.
Well, if we're talking about people specifically, yeah, but not married could apply to nearly everything.
Okay, but I mean, I think in these, generally when we're having these philosophical and theological discussions, I mean, we're normally talking about people.
It's true, and I'm not saying you guys ever made this specific claim, but I hear online all the time people say things like babies are atheists, which is, yes, technically true if you consider lack of belief atheism. That's kind of where I'm coming from there.
But then people are fighting semantics, and this is actually why, it's one of the challenges we often have, and one of the reasons I think Jimmy and I like call-in shows is because you don't just have to slap a label on someone like on Twitter. Like, you can actually have that nuance. When someone says they're an atheist, like normally, Josh, I would have asked the person, oh, you're an atheist, what do you mean by that? Because that's always the first thing you should ask someone. If someone says they're a feminist, you should say, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by feminist? What do you, like, labels in general aren't that useful in a one-on-one conversation. But so,
I see what you're saying, yeah. Well, I'm willing to grant that anybody... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Josh, I actually wanted to do a little experiment with you also.
Sure.
So let's say babies and rocks are both atheists. Let's say that that's the world we live in, and that is actually the use of the word, of the label. All right, so now we're in that world. Rocks and babies are atheists. I say to you, Josh, I'm an atheist. Josh, do I believe in a God if I've accurately said I'm an atheist just then?
No, you categorically don't believe in a God.
And honest to goodness, this is why I say I don't give a fuck if babies and rocks are atheists, because that means I have communicated 100% of the information to you that I want to communicate when I only use the word atheist. Because anything else I want to talk about, I'm going to use other labels. I'm going to say skeptic. I'm going to say a humanist. I'm going to use these other ones. So regardless of whether or not rocks are or aren't, at the end of the day, the only question we should be answering when a person says, I'm an atheist, is do they believe in God? And that would be no. Now, whether it's a disbelief or a lack of belief, that's, again, another semantic argument that you clarify with more labels. But a person has still successfully said, I'm an atheist. You know they don't believe in a God. So whether or not rocks and babies are atheists or aren't atheists in those scenarios, the question is still answered accurately. And for me, that's why I go, I'm happy enough. And this is like, in a way, I'm agreeing with you that the word is almost meaningless, because the word atheist, when I started my YouTube journey, I thought was the most important label I had. Now it's not even top 30. Like everything else matters way more because it is simply a very limited answer to a very limited proposition. So that's...
Yeah, I think it would be more meaningful to have a distinction between non-theist and atheist, though. Like, if you're an atheist, you would automatically be a non-theist, right? Mm-hmm. Just when you're specifically talking about your belief in God, I think it's important to have philosophical labels that have a specific meaning, not a broad meaning. But that's just my opinion. The actual definition of atheist disagrees with me. So,
but yeah, and I guess, Josh, are you aware of the other qualifiers that have become popular, like weak atheist versus strong atheist, implicit versus explicit? Because
want to hear something hilarious, Jimmy, that we can probably discuss on another Sunday?
Sure.
I am a strong atheist who believes that you can know there is no God as much as you can know any other scientific fact. Interesting.
So you're not just you're a Gnostic as opposed to agnostic. You're a Gnostic strong atheist. That would be an interesting thing to have a conversation about. I don't know, Paul. Do you want to hit it now, or should we hit another? I do know we have lines.
I'm open to.
Yeah, I don't want to hold up your theist callers.
Right.
Well, what's your elevator pitch for there is no God?
That lack. Oh boy. Okay. I'm going to say this, and you'll totally tear me apart because I'm not going to have the chance to throw the whole thing out there. But that people who say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence are wrong.
So I think that is again, I'm actually not going to tear you apart because I think absence of evidence can be evidence of absence if the proposition demands an extraordinary amount of evidence. In other words, like if I say a marble's going to fall on your head every 2 minutes because of a magic cat that's dropping them floating above your head, and no marble hits your head at all, I would say you have an argument for absence of evidence being a type of positive evidence. But I do understand that you're saying you don't have time to get into the whole thing. Plus, because this wasn't the topic you were calling in about, you might want to gather some thoughts before you do the whole pitch on a future one.
Let me say this very quickly so that everyone in chat can tear me apart. My perspective is very simply that if you propose something before you collect evidence, statistically you will be wrong. So that the proposition of God prior to the collection of evidence for God will statistically be so statistically wrong that it would be equivalent to saying that it is certainly wrong.
Interesting, which I think we're about to
Have I lost everyone?
Well, I think we're actually going to get into a similar proposition or talking about something similar with the next call who wants to talk about the distinction between knowledge and belief. And so,
perfect.
This will be a good transition.
Right. Before Josh, you call in again, Josh, just think about how you're not committing the black swan fallacy. Think about whether or not your proposition relates to the Higgs boson particle, and just think about some things like that before you call in next time, so that we can have a really robust conversation, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
I totally have, but again, I want to be considered everyone else's time.
Yep.
Yep. So I will call again, and we'll have another discussion another day. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Josh. Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.